The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside Shafter, Texas, and Katherine Sullivan knew from the horrified expressions greeting her that she had made a terrible mistake. Dust billowed around her worn traveling dress as she stepped down, her joints protesting the 3-day journey from San Antonio. At 34 years old, she was acutely aware that she did not match the image these frontier men expected when they ordered a mail-order bride. The advertisement had been clear about availability, nothing more. She had not lied about her age, but she suspected the man who had sent for her had not bothered to read that particular detail carefully. 3 men stood outside the general store, their faces ranging from surprise to outright disgust. The shortest one, barely taller than Katherine herself, stepped forward with a paper clutched in his meaty hand. "You are Katherine Sullivan." His voice held disbelief. "I am." She straightened her spine, refusing to show weakness even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "Says here you are coming from San Antonio to marry William Preston." He looked her up and down with unconcealed disappointment. "William is expecting a young woman, not someone who looks like she has already lived half her life." Heat flooded Katherine's cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "The advertisement did not specify an age requirement. I responded honestly to all questions posed." "William." The man bellowed toward the saloon across the dirt street. "Your bride is here." A lanky man in his mid-20s emerged, squinting in the bright afternoon sun of September 1878. His face went through several expressions as he took in Katherine's appearance: confusion, then disappointment, then something uglier. He crossed the street with long strides, his boots kicking up small clouds with each step. "This is some kind of joke," William Preston said flatly. "I paid good money for passage for a bride, not somebody's maiden aunt." Katherine felt the words like physical blows, but she had endured worse. Losing her husband to fever 5 years ago, watching her small dress shop fail when the economy crashed, selling everything she owned just to eat, those had been worse. This was merely humiliating. "I can return your payment for passage," she said quietly, though she had already spent half of it on supplies for the journey. "However, I do not have the means to return to San Antonio immediately." "That is your problem, not mine." William turned to his friends. "Send a wire to the agency. Tell them they sent damaged goods." The casual cruelty of it stung more than Katherine wanted to admit. She stood in the middle of Shafter's Main Street, her single trunk beside her, as William Preston walked away without looking back. The other men dispersed quickly, leaving her alone as the September heat beat down mercilessly. She had nowhere to go. The little money she had left would not last more than a few days, certainly not enough for return passage. Katherine picked up her skirts and walked toward the only building that looked remotely welcoming, a small church with a freshly painted white exterior. The interior was blessedly cool. Wooden pews lined either side of a narrow aisle, and simple glass windows let in filtered light. Katherine sank onto the nearest bench, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of her situation. She had gambled everything on this chance, on the possibility of a new life, and it had collapsed before it even began. "Might I help you, miss?" Katherine looked up to find a woman in her 50s regarding her with kind eyes. She wore a simple cotton dress and an apron dusted with flour. "Mrs." Katherine corrected automatically. "I am widowed, and I fear I am beyond help at the moment." The woman sat beside her uninvited. "I am Clara Jennings. My husband is the pastor here, though he is currently visiting a sick family outside town. You look like you have had a difficult day." The kindness in her voice nearly undid Katherine's composure. "I came to marry William Preston. He has rejected me." Clara's expression darkened. "That boy. His father would be ashamed." She patted Catherine's hand. "Well, you cannot sit here all day. Come along to the parsonage. We will have tea and figure out what to do." Catherine followed gratefully, retrieving her trunk with Clara's help. The parsonage was a modest building beside the church, with a small garden struggling against the Texas heat. Inside, Clara bustled about making tea while Catherine sat at a worn kitchen table. "William Preston is a foolish young man," Clara said, setting down 2 cups. "His father was good people, but William has always been more concerned with appearances than substance. What was his objection to you, my age? I am 34. "Hardly ancient." Clara sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Though I suppose to a boy of 25, anyone over 20 seems old. The problem with William is that he wants a pretty ornament, not a partner. He will learn that lesson the hard way, I expect." "That does not solve my immediate problem," Catherine said. "I have limited funds and nowhere to stay. You will stay here tonight at least. As for the rest, well, Shafter may be small, but there are decent people here. A widow with skills can make her way. What did you do before coming here?" "I ran a dress shop. I can sew most anything." Clara's face brightened. "Now that is useful." "Martha Perkins, she runs the dry goods store, has been saying for months she needs help with alterations. The mining company keeps bringing in new men, and they all need clothes adjusted or mended. And the ranchers' wives are always wanting something done. You might be able to establish yourself here after all." Hope flickered in Catherine's chest, small but real. "You think so? I know Martha. She will give you a fair chance." Clara stood. "But first you need rest. Come, I will show you the spare room." That night, Catherine lay in a narrow bed in the parsonage, listening to unfamiliar sounds through the open window. Shafter was nothing like San Antonio. It was smaller, rougher, but there was something honest about it too. She had come here expecting marriage, expecting to belong to someone else's life. Perhaps instead she would have to build her own. The next morning, Clara introduced her to Martha Perkins, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who ran the dry goods store with impressive efficiency. Martha looked Catherine over with a critical eye that reminded her of a master tailor evaluating cloth. "Clara says you can sew. I can. I ran my own shop for 3 years in San Antonio." "Why did you leave?" Catherine appreciated the directness. "My shop failed when the economy crashed. I could not compete with the larger establishments. I thought marriage would be a fresh start." "And William Preston proved to be an idiot," Martha said bluntly. "That boy has about as much sense as a bucket with a hole in it. His father was worth 10 of him." She gestured around the store. "I get requests for alterations all the time. Mining brings in workers, ranch hands need repairs, and the ladies want their dresses fitted proper. I do not have time for it all. Can you show me your work?" Catherine opened her trunk, pulling out a dress she had made for herself, pointing out the careful seams, the reinforced stitching, the way she had modified the pattern to account for practical movement while maintaining a flattering line. Martha examined it closely. "This is good work. Very good. Here is my offer. I will give you space in the back room to work. You keep 70% of what you earn from alterations and custom work. I keep 30% for providing the space and materials. I will spread word that you are available. We will try it for a month and see how it goes." "That is very generous. It is practical. If you are as good as this suggests, we will both profit." Martha's expression softened slightly. "And Clara told me what happened. You deserve a fair chance, not the treatment William gave you." Catherine spent the rest of that day setting up her workspace. Martha provided a sewing machine, a precious Singer model that made Catherine's fingers itch to use it. She organized thread, needles, scissors, and measuring tape, creating order from chaos. By evening, she felt the first real stirring of purpose since arriving in Shafter. Clara insisted she stay at the parsonage until she earned enough for her own lodging. Katherine protested, not wanting to impose, but Clara was immovable on the subject. "We have the room, and it would sit empty otherwise. Besides, you can help me with the church social next month. I hate decorating, and you have an eye for it." Over the next week, Katherine threw herself into work. Her first customers were ranch hands needing torn shirts repaired, simple work that she completed quickly and well. Word spread. A miner's wife came in wanting a dress let out to accommodate her pregnancy. Two cowboys needed new shirts made to replace ones worn beyond repair. A wealthy rancher's daughter wanted a dress modified to match the latest fashions from back east. Katherine worked long hours, her fingers flying over fabric, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of creation. It was satisfying in a way she had almost forgotten, making things with her hands, solving the small puzzles of fit and form. She began to recognize faces in town, to exchange greetings, to feel like less of an outsider. She tried not to think about William Preston, though she saw him occasionally around town. He ignored her completely, which suited her fine. She had no desire to interact with a man who had looked at her with such contempt. What she did not expect was Everett Jackson. He came into the store on a Thursday afternoon, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable among the bolts of fabric and notions. He was tall, probably in his early 40s, with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. His eyes were a striking pale blue, startling against his tanned face. "Excuse me, madam," he said to Martha. "I heard you have someone who can do alterations." Martha pointed toward the back. "Katherine handles all that through there." He approached Katherine's workspace hesitantly, as if unsure of his welcome. She looked up from the dress she was hemming, taking in his worn but clean clothes, the careful way he held himself. "How can I help you?" He held out a shirt, good quality but clearly old. "The shoulders are getting tight. I have had this a long time, and I would like to keep wearing it if possible." "Can you let it out?" Katherine examined the shirt. It was well made, the fabric still sound despite obvious wear. She could see where previous alterations had been made, careful work done by someone who knew what they were doing. "This is possible, yes. It will take a few days. May I have your name for the order?" "Everett Jackson. I have a ranch about 5 miles outside town." She wrote it down, quoting him a fair price. He agreed without haggling, which she appreciated. Many customers tried to negotiate her already reasonable rates. "You are the woman who was supposed to marry William Preston," he said, then looked horrified at his own words. "I apologize." "That was rude." "It is the truth," Katherine said evenly. "Yes, I am that woman. He rejected me for being too old." Everett's jaw tightened. "William Preston is a fool, begging your pardon for speaking plainly, but it is true. You are not the first to say so." Katherine found herself almost smiling. "I have made peace with it. His rejection led me here to work I enjoy. Perhaps things happen as they should." "That is a charitable way to look at it." He hesitated. "I will return for the shirt in a few days then." After he left, Martha appeared at Katherine's elbow. "Everett Jackson is a good man. Lost his wife 4 years ago to childbed fever. Baby did not survive either. He has been running that ranch alone since, barely taking time to come to town." Katherine filed that information away, though she told herself it did not matter. She was here to work, to build a life for herself, not to moon over some rancher. But when Everett returned 3 days later to collect his shirt, she found herself paying attention to the way he smiled when he saw how well it fit, the genuine warmth in his thanks. He paid her, added an extra $1 she tried to refuse, and left with a tip of his hat. She thought that would be the end of it. but he returned 2 weeks later with another repair, then again with a request for new work shirts. Each time he lingered a little longer, asking about her work, sharing small details about ranch life. She learned he raised cattle, that he had been in Texas for 15 years, that he had come from Tennessee originally. "Why Shafter?" she asked one afternoon as she measured him for a new shirt. "The land is good for cattle, and it was far enough from the war," he said. Tennessee had been devastated by the conflict. "I wanted to start fresh, build something new. My wife, Sarah, she was from San Antonio. We met when I was there buying supplies, married quick, and brought her out here." His voice grew distant. "She was young, maybe too young for the hardship of ranch life, but she never complained. I am sorry for your loss. It has been 4 years. The grief does not go away, but it becomes something you can carry." He looked at her directly. "You understand that, I think." She did. They stood in that shared understanding for a moment, two people who had loved and lost, who carried that weight with them. October brought cooler weather, a relief after the oppressive summer heat. Katherine had saved enough to rent a small room above the general store, though Clara seemed sad to see her go. The work continued steady, and she began to feel established, like she belonged in Shafter not by marriage but by her own merit. Everett became a regular customer, though his clothes hardly needed the amount of attention he claimed. She suspected he was inventing reasons to visit, and she found she did not mind. He was easy to talk to, kind, with a dry sense of humor that emerged once he relaxed around her. One afternoon he arrived with a torn jacket and an unusual request. "The church social is next week. I know it is probably presumptuous, but would you consider attending with me?" Katherine's hands stilled on the fabric she was cutting. "As in together. People will talk." "People are already talking. Small towns have nothing better to do." His expression was earnest. "I enjoy your company, Katherine. I would like to spend more time with you outside this store if you would be amenable to that." She considered refusing. It had been 5 years since her husband died, 5 years of focusing only on survival. The idea of opening herself to someone new was terrifying, but it was also thrilling in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. "I would like that," she said quietly. His smile transformed his whole face, making him look younger, less careworn. "Good. That is very good." The church social was a modest affair, tables set up in the town square with food contributed by various families. Lanterns hung from poles, and someone had brought a fiddle. Katherine wore her best dress, dark blue with modest trim, and tried not to feel self-conscious as she arrived with Everett. Eyes followed them, of course. She heard whispers, saw the speculation. But Everett stayed close, his presence solid and reassuring, and gradually she relaxed into the evening. Clara greeted them warmly, as did Martha and several other women Katherine had come to know through her work. The pastor, a gentle man named Robert Jennings, shook Everett's hand and welcomed Katherine to the community properly. William Preston was there with a young woman who could not have been more than 19, pretty in the way of youth, but looking uncomfortable in the crowd. He saw Katherine with Everett and his expression soured noticeably. "Ignore him," Everett murmured. "He is not worth your attention." They ate, talked with neighbors, and when the fiddle music started, Everett asked her to dance. Katherine had not danced in years, but it came back to her body easily, the simple patterns of the reel. Everett was a competent dancer, leading her through the steps with quiet confidence. "I am glad you came to Shafter," he said as they moved together, "even if the circumstances were not ideal." "So am I," she admitted, "though I would not have thought so that first day. That first day I saw you standing in the street after William rejected you." His voice was low, meant only for her. "I thought he was the biggest fool in Texas." You stood there with your head up, refusing to show weakness, and I thought, there is a woman with real strength. You saw that. I did. I went home that day thinking about you, wondering what kind of man turns away a woman with that kind of spine. He guided her through a turn. I am glad he did, though. Gives the rest of us a chance. Katherine felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the exertion of dancing. When the music ended, they stood close for a moment before propriety forced them to step apart. The rest of the evening passed in a warm blur. Everett introduced her to other ranchers, men he did business with, and their wives. She was accepted more warmly than she expected, judged not by her age or her failed marriage arrangement, but by her work and her character. As Everett walked her home, the October night cool around them, Katherine felt something shift inside her. This was not the life she had imagined when she came to Shafter. It was something she was building herself, piece by piece, and it was starting to feel like it might be better than anything she could have planned. "May I call on you properly?" Everett asked at her door. "Not just for alterations, but to court you." Her heart raced. "Yes, I would like that." He smiled, tipped his hat, and walked away into the night. Katherine climbed the stairs to her small room feeling lighter than she had in years. Everett's courtship was patient and steady, much like the man himself. He came to town twice a week, always with some excuse: a shirt that needed mending, supplies to purchase, business to conduct. But he always made time to see Katherine, to talk with her, to slowly weave himself into her life. He told her about his ranch, the challenges of raising cattle in the Texas heat, the satisfaction of building something lasting. She told him about her life before, her marriage to a good man taken too soon, the struggle to survive alone, the desperate hope that had brought her to Shafter. "I thought I needed to belong to someone else's life," she said one afternoon as they sat on the bench outside the store. November had arrived with cooler temperatures and occasional rain. That marriage was the only way to be safe, to have a future. "And now?" Everett asked. "Now I know I can build my own life. The work I do, it is mine. The money I earned it. That matters." "It does matter," he agreed. "But building a life with someone, that can matter too, not giving up yourself but adding to what you already have." She looked at him, at his honest face and steady eyes. "Is that what you want, to build something together?" "I think I do, if you are willing." He took her hand, calluses rough against her skin. "I am not asking you to give up anything, Katherine. Your work, your independence, those are part of who you are. But I think we could have something good together. I think we could be partners in the truest sense." It was different from her first marriage, which had been born of young love and little thought for the future. This was a choice made with open eyes, with full knowledge of what loss felt like and what building a life required. "I need time," she said. "Not because I doubt you, but because I want to be sure. I want to choose this for the right reasons. Take all the time you need. I am not going anywhere." December arrived with surprising cold, a snap that had everyone bundling into whatever warm clothes they could find. Katherine's work increased as people needed repairs and adjustments for winter wear. She barely had time to look up from her sewing machine most days. Everett continued his visits, but she noticed he looked tired, worn in a way that went beyond normal ranch work. When she asked, he brushed it off at first, but she persisted. "One of my ranch hands quit last month," he finally admitted. "I have been working twice as hard to keep up. It is manageable, but I will be glad when I can hire someone new." "Can you afford help?" "The ranch does well enough. I just need to find someone reliable." He smiled wryly. "That is harder than it sounds out here. Many men would rather try their luck at mining than do honest ranch work." An idea formed in Katherine's mind. What if you hired someone in their family, gave them a place to stay on your land? That might attract more reliable people. That is not a bad thought. I have a lined shack that could be fixed up. He looked at her curiously. You have a good head for this kind of thinking. I ran a business. I understand the value of good workers and what it takes to keep them. Another reason I think we would do well together, he said softly. Christmas in Shafter was a modest celebration. The church held a service, families exchanged simple gifts, and there was a community dinner where everyone contributed what they could. Katherine made new altar cloths for the church, fine white linen with careful embroidery, her gift to the community that had welcomed her. Everett gave her a bolt of beautiful fabric, deep green wool that would make a fine dress. I ordered it from San Antonio, he said. Thought you might like it. She gave him new work gloves, lined with soft leather, practical but made with care. They stood together after the service, watching children play in the street, and Katherine felt a sense of peace she had not experienced in a very long time. I have been thinking about what you said, she told him, about building something together. He went very still. And I think you are right. I think we could have something good. She turned to face him fully. I love you, Everett. It surprised me how it crept up quiet until one day I realized it was there, solid and real. His face transformed with joy. Katherine, I have loved you since about the third time I came into that store, and you told me straight out that my shirt was beyond saving, and I should stop being sentimental about it. You are the most honest, capable woman I have ever met, and I thank God daily that William Preston was fool enough to reject you. He kissed her then, in front of half the town, gentle and sure. When they broke apart, Katherine saw Clara wiping tears nearby, Martha nodding approval, and even the pastor smiling broadly. Will you marry me? Everett asked. Not because you need security or a place to belong, but because we choose each other. Yes, Katherine said simply. Yes, I will. They married in February 1879, in the same church where Katherine had sought refuge 6 months earlier. Clara decorated with winter greenery, and Martha closed the store for the afternoon. It was a small ceremony but full of genuine warmth, the community gathering to celebrate a union they had watched develop from awkward beginning to certain end. Katherine wore a new dress, made from the green wool Everett had given her for Christmas, styled to flatter her figure and reflect her personality. She was 35 years old, marrying for the second time, and she had never felt more certain of anything. Everett wore a new suit she had made for him, dark and well-fitted, making him look distinguished and handsome. When he said his vows, his voice was steady and strong, promising partnership and respect along with love. Pastor Jennings pronounced them husband and wife, and Everett kissed her like she was something precious. The gathered crowd cheered, and Katherine felt tears of happiness slip down her cheeks. The reception was held at the general store, tables pushed together and laden with food. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing. William Preston was notably absent, having left town 2 weeks earlier after his young bride ran off with a traveling salesman. The story was that she had found ranch life too isolated and William too immature. Katherine felt only a distant pity for him. As evening fell, Everett brought his wagon around. Katherine had already moved her essential belongings to his ranch the week before, but now she was going there as his wife, to the home they would share. The ranch was about an hour outside Shafter, accessible by a decent road that wound through scrubby terrain. The house was modest but solid, built of wood with a covered porch and a steep roof. Inside, it was clean but sparse, clearly the home of a man living alone. I know it needs a woman's touch, Everett said, almost apologetically. I have not done much with it since Sarah died. Katherine walked through the room slowly. The main room served as kitchen and living space with a good stove and a large table. 2 bedrooms, one clearly unused and a small room that might serve as an office or sewing room. It was not large, but it was well built and had good bones. "It needs life," she said finally. "Not just a woman's touch, but both of us making it ours. That room there, could I use it for sewing? I want to keep working if that is acceptable." "Of course it is acceptable. I told you I do not want you to give up who you are." He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "This is our home now, Katherine. We will make it what we want together." That first night they were tentative with each other, learning what this new intimacy meant. Everett was gentle, patient, letting her set the pace. It had been years since Katherine had been with anyone, and there was awkwardness as their bodies relearned what desire felt like. But there was also tenderness, and underneath, a building passion that surprised them both. They were not young, but they were also not so old that their bodies had forgotten hunger. They came together with increasing urgency, finding rhythm and pleasure in each other. Afterward, lying tangled in sheets, Katherine felt more at peace than she had in longer than she could remember. Everett held her close, his breathing deep and even, and she marveled at how life could shift so completely. 6 months ago, she had stood alone in Shafters Street, rejected and lost. Now she was here, married to a good man, building a life that was truly hers. Life on the ranch was different from anything Katherine had known. The work was constant: cooking, cleaning, maintaining the house and garden, and still finding time for her sewing. Everett was up before dawn each day, tending cattle and working the land, often not returning until dusk. They fell into a partnership that felt natural. She learned about ranch life, how to spot when cattle were sick, when the grass was good, what weather signs meant. He learned about her work, understanding why certain fabrics required special care, appreciating the artistry in a well-made garment. Martha continued to send work her way, customers coming out to the ranch, or Katherine bringing finished pieces to town when she accompanied Everett on supply runs. She kept her own money separate, as they had agreed, maintaining her independence even within marriage. In March, they hired a young couple to help on the ranch. Frank and Molly Harrison were in their mid-20s, hardworking and eager for a fresh start. They moved into the fixed-up line shack with their baby daughter, and Frank proved to be excellent with cattle and horses. Having them on the ranch made life easier for Everett, giving him help with the heavy work and someone to manage things when he had to be away. Molly and Katherine became friends, the younger woman grateful for an experienced ear as she navigated motherhood and ranch life. Spring brought wildflowers across the scrubland, surprising bursts of color in the normally brown landscape. Katherine planted a garden behind the house, vegetables and herbs she would need for cooking and preserving. Everett built her a chicken coop, and soon they had fresh eggs daily. It was a good life, she thought, as she worked in the garden one April afternoon. Hard, certainly, but satisfying in ways her old life had never been. She was building something real here, something that would last. "You look happy," Everett said, coming up from the barn with an armload of wood for the stove. "I am," she said simply, "truly happy." He set down the wood and pulled her into his arms, heedless of the dirt on her hands and dress. "I love you, Katherine Jackson. Best decision I ever made, working up the courage to ask you to that church social. Best mistake William Preston ever made, rejecting me," she countered, and they both laughed. That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Katherine brought up something that had been on her mind. "I know you lost a child with Sarah. Have you thought about whether you might want to try again?" She felt him tense beside her. "I had not let myself think about it much. The fear of loss, it stays with you." "It does," she agreed. "But I am 35, Everett. If we are going to have children, we should probably not wait too long. I am healthy, and so are you." There is always risk, but there is also hope. He was quiet for a long moment. Would you want children? At our age, starting over with that, I think I would. Not to replace what we have lost, but to add to what we are building. She turned to face him in the darkness. But only if you wanted to. I will not push you into something that frightens you. It does frighten me, he admitted. But the idea of a child with you, of our family growing, that also fills me with hope. Real hope, not just the desperate kind. His hand found hers. Yes. Let us try if it happens, and trust that it will be well. Summer was brutal that year, temperatures soaring and rain scarce. The cattle struggled, and Everett spent long days checking water sources and moving herds to where grass was still decent. Katherine kept the house as cool as possible, cooking in the early morning and late evening to avoid heating it during the worst of the day. She also discovered, to her mingled joy and terror, that she was pregnant. The signs were unmistakable. Missed monthly courses, nausea in the mornings, a bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of rest seemed to cure. She waited until she was certain before telling Everett, afraid of his reaction, afraid of her own hope. She chose a quiet evening in late June after dinner when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "I have news," she said carefully. "I am with child." Everett's head whipped around, his eyes wide. "You are certain as I can be without a doctor confirming it." "All the signs are there." He stared at her for a long moment, and she could not read his expression. Then his face crumpled, and she realized with shock that he was crying. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I am scared," he whispered against her hair. "I am so scared." "I know, so am I." She held him back just as tightly. "But we will face it together. We will get through this together." They sat like that as darkness fell, holding each other, sharing fear and hope in equal measure. Katherine continued her work through the early months of pregnancy, though she was more tired than usual. Molly, who had gone through pregnancy recently, was full of advice and support. The women of Shafter, when word spread, were equally supportive, sharing their own stories and remedies. Even Martha, usually so practical and unsentimental, showed unexpected tenderness. "You will do fine," she told Katherine firmly. "You are strong and you know yourself. That counts for more than youth in this situation." The doctor in Shafter, a competent if somewhat gruff man named Dr. Henderson, examined Katherine and pronounced her healthy. "Age is not in your favor," he said bluntly, "but you are in good condition otherwise. Follow the usual precautions, do not overwork, and call for me when your time comes." Everett was simultaneously protective and terrified. He hovered when he was home, trying to prevent her from doing anything strenuous. Katherine finally had to sit him down and explain that she needed to keep active, that bed rest was not prescribed unless there were complications. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she said firmly. "Women have been working through pregnancy since the beginning of time. I will be careful, but I will not become an invalid." "I just cannot lose you," he said quietly. "Either of you, you will not. We are going to be fine." She took his hands. "You need to trust that, Everett. Fear will not keep us safe. Only love and faith will." Autumn arrived with blessed relief from the heat. Katherine's belly swelled visibly now, and she had to adjust all her dresses to accommodate her changing shape. It was strange and wondrous, feeling the baby move inside her, a tiny life they had created together. They prepared the unused bedroom as a nursery. Everett built a cradle from good oak, sanding it smooth and carving simple designs into the headboard. Katherine sewed tiny clothes, blankets, and linens, her skilled fingers creating beautiful things for this child they had not yet met. In November, they traveled to Shafter for the church social, Katherine now obviously pregnant. She felt self-conscious about her size and age, but the community received her warmly. Clara fussed over her, and Martha presented her with a package of soft flannel, perfect for baby clothes. Even some of the men congratulated Everett, though she noticed a few of the older ones giving her concerned looks. Childbirth at her age was risky and everyone knew it, but she refused to dwell on the fear. She and Everett had chosen hope, and she would hold to that. December brought cold winds and occasional frost. Katherine grew larger and more uncomfortable, her back aching and her sleep restless. The baby was active, constantly moving, which Dr. Henderson said was a good sign. Christmas was quiet that year, just the two of them and the Harrisons at the ranch. They exchanged simple gifts and shared a good meal. Katherine felt the baby kick vigorously as they said grace, and she shared a smile with Everett across the table. "Not long now," he said, wonder and worry mixed in his voice. "No, not long," she agreed. Her pain started on a cold January morning in 1880, waves of cramping that started low and spread through her belly. She knew what it meant, and the fear she had been holding at bay rushed in all at once. "Everett," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "You need to fetch Dr. Henderson. It is time." She watched his face go pale, but he moved into action immediately. He got her settled in bed, made sure she had water and cloths nearby, then rode hard for Shafter to fetch the doctor. Molly came up from the line shack, having seen him leave, and stayed with Katherine while they waited. The labor was long and hard. Dr. Henderson arrived and examined her, pronouncing everything normal but warning that it could be many hours. Everett stayed by her side when he could, leaving only when the doctor insisted he was in the way. Katherine had forgotten how all-consuming labor was, how it narrowed the world to nothing but pain and endurance. Time became meaningless. She focused on breathing, on the encouragement from Molly and the doctor, on Everett's voice when he was allowed back in. Night fell, then dawn broke, and still the baby did not come. She was exhausted beyond anything she had ever experienced, and fear began to creep in. Was something wrong? Was the baby in distress? Was she going to die here, having come so far only to fail? "You are doing well," Dr. Henderson said, checking her again. "The baby is positioned correctly. It is just taking time. That is normal for a first pregnancy at your age." "It is not my first pregnancy," she gasped between contractions. "I had a stillbirth years ago, my first marriage, barely 5 months along. That is the only reason I know how to do this at all." The doctor nodded, filing that information away. "Then your body knows what to do. Trust it." She tried. God, she tried. And finally, as afternoon light slanted through the bedroom window, she felt the overwhelming urge to push. Dr. Henderson confirmed the baby was ready, and Katherine bore down with everything she had left. It felt like being torn apart. She heard herself screaming, heard Everett's voice breaking as he encouraged her, heard Molly praying in the corner. And then, suddenly, pressure released, and a baby's cry filled the room. "A boy," Dr. Henderson announced, holding up a squalling, red-faced infant. "A healthy boy." Katherine collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. Everett was crying too, his hand gripping hers so hard it hurt, but she did not care. Their son. They had a son, and he was alive and crying and perfect. The doctor cleaned the baby quickly, checked him over, then placed him on Katherine's chest. She looked down at the tiny face, the eyes scrunched shut, the mouth open in outrage, and felt a love so fierce it stole her breath. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, little one. We are your parents, and we love you so much." Everett leaned in, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. The baby grasped it reflexively, and Everett made a sound between a laugh and a sob. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Katherine, thank you." The baby was indeed perfect. 7 pounds of healthy infant who nursed eagerly once Katherine figured out how to help him latch. They named him Thomas, after Everett's father who had passed years ago. Thomas Jackson, born January 15, 1880, on a ranch outside Shafter, Texas, Dr. Henderson stayed overnight to make sure there were no complications, then left the next morning with instructions for Katherine's recovery. "You did well," he told her gruffly. "Rest as much as you can, let your body heal, and call for me if you have any concerns." The first weeks with Thomas were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Katherine had forgotten how demanding a newborn could be, the constant feeding and changing, the unpredictable sleep patterns. But she had also forgotten the wonder of it, the way a baby's tiny fingers curled around yours, the soft weight of a sleeping infant on your chest. Everett was a devoted father, helping when he could while still managing the ranch. He walked Thomas around the house late at night when the baby was fussy, sang to him in a surprisingly good voice, and looked at him with such naked love that Katherine's heart ached. Molly was a godsend, helping with cooking and cleaning so Katherine could focus on recovery and the baby. The women of Shafter sent food and gifts, supporting her through the vulnerable early weeks of motherhood. By February, Katherine was starting to feel like herself again. She was tired constantly, but it was a manageable tired. Thomas was settling into something approaching a routine, and she was getting better at reading his cues. One evening, as she nursed Thomas while Everett cleaned up after dinner, she felt a wave of contentment so profound she had to close her eyes against the strength of it. "What is it?" Everett asked, seeing her expression. "I am just happy," she said. "So completely happy. A year ago I was standing in Shafter's street, rejected and humiliated and terrified. Now I am here with you, with our son, in a home I helped build. It is more than I ever dreamed of." Everett came over, kissing the top of her head, then Thomas's soft, dark hair. "William Preston rejecting you was the best thing that ever happened to both of us." "To all three of us," Katherine corrected, looking down at their son. "We will have to tell him that story someday." "When he is older," Everett agreed. "Old enough to understand that sometimes what looks like disaster is really opportunity in disguise." Spring brought new life to the ranch. The cattle had survived the winter well, and the grass was coming back strong from the sparse winter rains. Thomas was growing rapidly, his tiny features becoming more defined, his eyes settling into a blue like his father's. Katherine gradually returned to her sewing work, though on a smaller scale than before. She worked during Thomas's naps, creating pieces at her own pace. Martha understood and continued to send smaller projects her way, things she could manage around motherhood. Everett hired another ranch hand, a young man named Peter who worked well with Frank. The ranch was doing well financially, better than it had in years. Everett attributed it to having reliable help and a stable home life. "A man works better when he has something real to work for," he told Katherine. In May, they took Thomas to church for the first time, standing before the congregation as Pastor Jennings blessed their son. Clara held the baby during the ceremony, tears running down her cheeks, and Katherine understood why. This was a child born of second chances, of people brave enough to choose hope over fear. That summer was easier than the previous one, or perhaps Katherine was simply too busy to notice the heat as much. Thomas was crawling now, getting into everything, requiring constant supervision. Everett built a fence around the porch so the baby could play safely while Katherine worked. They fell into a rhythm as a family. Everett would come in from the fields for lunch, playing with Thomas while Katherine prepared food. Evenings were spent together on the porch, watching the sun set, Thomas on Everett's lap while Katherine mended or sewed. It was simple and profound at once, this life they had built. In September, on the second anniversary of Catherine's arrival in Shafter, Everett surprised her with a trip to town for a special dinner at the small restaurant that had opened the previous year. Molly agreed to watch Thomas, and they rode to town feeling like young people on a date. The restaurant was modest but clean, with good food and friendly service. They ate roast beef and potatoes, and Catherine had apple pie for dessert. It was a simple meal, but it felt luxurious after months of eating at home. 2 years, Everett said, reaching across the table to take her hand. 2 years since you came to Shafter. 2 years since William Preston rejected me, Catherine added with a smile. Best rejection I ever received. I wonder what happened to him, Everett mused. Last I heard, he had left town entirely. Martha said he went to California chasing gold. She suspects he will come back broke and wiser if he survives. Catherine shrugged. I hope he finds whatever he is looking for, but I am grateful our paths diverged when they did. After dinner, they walked through Shafter, greeting people they knew, and Catherine marveled at how much had changed. She was no longer the rejected mail-order bride, pitied or gossiped about. She was Everett Jackson, wife of Everett, mother of Thomas, skilled seamstress, and respected member of the community. She had earned that respect through her work and her character, and it meant everything. The years that followed were full and good. Thomas grew from baby to toddler to young boy, bright and energetic, with his father's eyes and his mother's determination. Catherine continued her sewing work, her reputation spreading so that people came from surrounding towns for her services. Everett expanded the ranch, buying adjacent land when it became available, and building the operation into one of the most successful in the area. He never forgot where they had started, though, and treated his workers fairly, paying them well and providing good living conditions. When Thomas was 4, Catherine discovered she was pregnant again. The pregnancy was harder than the first, her body older and less resilient. Dr. Henderson, now in his 60s and considering retirement, monitored her closely. You are taking a risk, he told her bluntly. At 40 years old, childbirth carries significant dangers. I know, Catherine said calmly, but this baby is here, and we will do our best to bring it safely into the world. The pregnancy progressed slowly. Catherine was more tired than she had been with Thomas, and certain activities left her breathless. But the baby was active and healthy by all signs, and she remained optimistic. Everett was more worried this time, his memories of losing Sarah and their baby still vivid. Catherine reassured him as best she could, but she understood his fear. She felt it too, late at night when doubts crept in. Their daughter was born on a cold December day in 1884, a month early but healthy despite her small size. The labor was faster than with Thomas, which Dr. Henderson said was common for second births. Catherine was exhausted and sore, but she held her daughter and felt that same overwhelming love she had felt with Thomas. Abigail, she said, naming the baby after her own mother who had passed when Catherine was young. Abigail Jackson. Abigail was tinier than Thomas had been, barely 6 pounds but fierce in her determination to live. She nursed well, cried lustily when she was unhappy, and from the beginning showed a stubborn streak that made Catherine laugh. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to hold her constantly, to show her his toys, to tell her about everything he saw and did. Everett watched his children with such pride and love that Catherine often found herself blinking back tears. They were a family, complete and real. Not the family Catherine had imagined when she came to Shafter 6 years ago, but something better. Something they had chosen and built together through love and effort and faith. The years continued to pass, marked by the growing of children and the deepening of love between Everett and Katherine. Thomas started school in Shafter, riding in each day with Frank Harrison, who had taken on the role of foreman. Abigail grew from infant to toddler, showing early signs of her mother's skill with her hands and her father's love of the outdoors. The ranch prospered. Everett's reputation as a fair dealer and good rancher brought him steady business. Katherine's sewing work evolved, and she began training other women, sharing her skills and creating a small network of seamstresses in the area. It was satisfying to pass on what she knew, to help other women gain independence through their craft. In the spring of 1890, when Thomas was 10 and Abigail 5, they received unexpected news. William Preston had died in California, killed in a mining accident. His few possessions were being returned to Shafter, and Katherine was listed among his effects as someone to contact. She went to town to handle it, more curious than sad. She had not thought about William in years, except as a footnote to her own story. The items were few, some clothes, a few dollars, and a letter addressed to her. Katherine opened it with Everett beside her, both of them wondering what it could say. The letter was dated 6 months before William's death. In it, he apologized for how he had treated her, acknowledging that he had been foolish and cruel. He wrote about his years in California, the hardship and loneliness, the realization that he had thrown away something potentially valuable because of his own shallow priorities. He had heard about her life, her marriage to Everett, their children, and their success. He wrote that he was glad she had found happiness, even though he had not. It was a sad, reflective letter, showing a man who had learned wisdom too late. Katherine folded it carefully when she finished reading. "Poor William," she said softly. "He spent his life chasing something he never found." "Do you regret that things did not work out with him?" Everett asked, though his tone was not jealous, merely curious. "Not at all. If things had worked out with him, I would never have had this life with you." She took Everett's hand. "His rejection freed me to find real love, real partnership. I wish he had found the same, but I cannot regret the path that led me here." They used the small amount of money from William's estate to buy a headstone for him in the Shafter Cemetery, a final act of grace toward a man who had inadvertently changed both their lives. As the years continued, Katherine watched her children grow with pride and occasional wistfulness. Thomas showed interest in ranching, spending more and more time with his father, learning the business from the ground up. Abigail was artistic and loved working with fabrics, often sitting beside Katherine as she sewed, learning the trade. In 1895, when Katherine was 51 and Everett 58, they celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary with a party at the ranch. The whole community came, ranch hands and their families, townspeople, friends they had accumulated over the years. Martha, now retired and living with her daughter, made the trip. Clara and Pastor Jennings, both elderly but still active, attended and blessed their marriage again. Thomas, now 15, stood tall and serious beside his father. Abigail, 10 years old with her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes, charmed everyone with her confident manner and quick wit. Looking at them, Katherine felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond anything she had achieved in her work. "We did well," Everett said that night as they prepared for bed, the house finally quiet after the celebration. "We did," Katherine agreed. "We built something that will last beyond us. The ranch, the family, the love, that is a good legacy." He pulled her into his arms, and despite the years and the changes to their bodies, the desire between them had not dimmed. They made love slowly, tenderly, with the deep knowledge that comes from years of intimacy. Afterward, lying tangled together, Katherine thought about the journey that had brought them here. She had come to Shafter expecting to be someone's wife, to fit into a pre-made life. Instead, she had been rejected and forced to build her own life from nothing. That rejection had been the greatest gift, though it had not felt like it at the time. It had led her to work she loved, to independence and self-respect, and ultimately to a man who valued her for exactly who she was. The years that followed were gentler, the pace of life slowing as they aged. Thomas took over more of the ranch work, eventually marrying a good woman from a neighboring ranch and building his own house on the property. Abigail apprenticed formally with her mother, becoming an even more skilled seamstress, her work sought after throughout the region. Grandchildren arrived, first from Thomas and his wife Margaret, then from Abigail, who married a schoolteacher and moved to town. Katherine and Everett watched their family expand, each new life a continuation of what they had built together. In 1903, at the age of 59, Katherine officially retired from regular sewing work, though she still took on special projects that interested her. Her hands were not as steady as they once were, and her eyes strained over fine work. But she had trained enough other women that her skills lived on through them. Everett still worked the ranch, though Thomas handled most of the day-to-day operations. He was 66 now, his hair white and his body showing the wear of decades of hard work. But his eyes were still that striking pale blue, and when he looked at Katherine, she still saw the love that had built their life together. They spent their evenings on the porch they had built together, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant colors. Sometimes their grandchildren played in the yard. Sometimes it was just the two of them, comfortable in the silence that comes from years of shared life. "You ever think about that day you arrived in Shafter?" Everett asked one evening, "when William rejected you?" "Sometimes," Katherine admitted. "Though it feels like it happened to a different person. I was so desperate then, so afraid. I thought I needed someone else to complete my life. And now I know that I completed my own life. You added to it, made it richer and fuller, but I was whole before you. That is what made our marriage work, I think. We chose each other from wholeness, not from desperation." Everett reached over and took her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "I chose exactly right. You were exactly what I needed, even though I did not know what I needed until I found you." "We both got lucky," Katherine said. "Lucky that William was fool enough to reject me. Lucky that you were brave enough to try again after loss. Lucky that we found each other in this vast world." As the sun set fully, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they sat together in perfect contentment. Their life had not been easy, but it had been good. They had built something lasting, a family, a home, a love that had weathered time and hardship and emerged stronger for it. The years continued their steady march. In 1910, at 66 years old, Katherine's health began to fail. Nothing dramatic, just the slow wearing down of a body that had lived fully and worked hard. She tired easily, needed more rest, found it harder to move around. Dr. Henderson had long since retired, replaced by his son, who was equally competent but gentler in manner. Young Dr. Henderson examined Katherine and delivered his verdict with compassion. "Your heart is wearing out, Mrs. Jackson. It is not surprising given your age and the hard life you have lived. I can give you medications to help, but ultimately, this is the natural progression of things." Katherine accepted this with equanimity. She had lived a full life, loved deeply, raised children who were thriving, and built something meaningful. She had no regrets. Everett took the news harder. At 73, he was still relatively healthy and had not let himself think about losing her. The thought of life without Katherine was almost unbearable. "You cannot leave me," he said one night, his voice breaking. "I do not know how to be without you." "You will manage," she said gently. "You are strong, Everett. You survived losing Sarah, you will survive losing me, and you will not be alone. Thomas and Abigail will be here and the grandchildren. You will have so much love around you. It will not be the same. No, it will not be the same, but it will still be good. She cupped his face in her hands, feeling the weathered skin, seeing the love in his eyes. We have had 32 years together. That is more than many people get. Be grateful for what we have had, not bitter about what we must lose. Her condition worsened slowly over the following year. She had good days when she felt almost like herself, and bad days when getting out of bed was an effort. The family rallied around her, Thomas and Margaret visiting daily, Abigail moving back to the ranch to help, grandchildren coming to sit with her and share their lives. Katherine used the time to prepare them all, to say the things that needed to be said. She wrote letters to each grandchild, to be opened when they were older. She sorted through her possessions, distributing her sewing tools and favorite fabrics to Abigail and others who would value them. She made peace with her life and her approaching death. Everett rarely left her side during those final months. He sat with her for hours, holding her hand, sharing memories, telling her how much she meant to him. "You saved me," he said one afternoon as spring sunshine streamed through the bedroom window. "After Sarah died, I was just going through the motions. Then you came, and you reminded me what living really meant. You taught me that it is never too late for love, never too late to start again." "You saved me too," Katherine replied, her voice weak but clear. "You showed me that I was worth loving just as I was. Not too old, not too independent, but exactly right. That was a gift beyond measure." In April 1911, as wildflowers bloomed across the Texas landscape, Katherine passed away peacefully in her sleep with Everett beside her. She was 67 years old and had lived a life that mattered. The funeral was well attended, the church packed with people whose lives she had touched. Thomas and Abigail stood strong despite their grief, supporting their father who looked diminished by loss. The service celebrated her life, her courage in rebuilding after rejection, her skill as a seamstress, her role as wife and mother, her place in the community. She was buried in the Shafter Cemetery, her headstone reading, "Katherine Jackson, beloved wife, mother, and friend." She built her life with her own hands. Everett lived another 5 years, supported by his children and grandchildren. He never remarried, saying once that he had been blessed with 2 great loves in his life, and that was more than enough. He spent his remaining years working the ranch as he was able, playing with great-grandchildren who began to arrive, and tending Katherine's grave with flowers he grew himself. When he died in 1916 at the age of 79, he was buried beside Katherine. His headstone read, "Everett Jackson, devoted husband and father, he knew love twice and chose wisely." Their legacy lived on through their children and grandchildren, through the ranch that still operated under Thomas's management, through the seamstresses who had learned from Katherine and passed those skills forward. The story of how they met became family legend. The mail-order bride rejected for being too old who built her own life and found love with a cowboy who saw her true worth. Thomas, managing the ranch and now elderly himself, would tell his grandchildren the story on quiet evenings. "Your grandmother came to Shafter expecting one life and got rejected. But instead of giving up, she built something better. She showed all of us that it is never too late to start over, never too late to find real love, and that sometimes rejection is just opportunity in disguise." The ranch prospered for generations, a testament to what Everett and Katherine had built together. The house they had shared was preserved, becoming a gathering place for family celebrations. Katherine's sewing room remained largely unchanged, her tools displayed with honor, a reminder of her independence and skill. In the town of Shafter, which grew and changed over the decades, there remained stories of the early settlers who had built the community. Katherine and Everett's story was told as one of the foundational romances, proof that love could be found in unexpected places, and that sometimes the worst moments led to the best outcomes. The small church where they had married still stood, and weddings held there often included a mention of Katherine and Everett. The couple who had proven that age was just a number, and that true partnership transcended initial expectations. Their story became a touchstone for anyone facing rejection or starting over, a reminder that endings could become beginnings if you had courage enough to keep going. Years after both had passed, their great-granddaughter researched the family history and wrote down the full story. She interviewed elderly relatives who remembered them, read Katherine's letters and Everett's journals, and pieced together a complete picture of their life together. What emerged was a love story that defied conventions. An older woman rejected for not fitting expectations who built her own successful life, a widowed rancher brave enough to risk his heart again, and a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection that lasted until death and beyond. The great-granddaughter published the story in a local historical journal, wanting others to know that love in the Old West was not always young and simple. Sometimes it was mature, hard-won, and all the more precious for it. Sometimes it came to people who had already lived, already lost, and found the courage to try again. Katherine and Everett's story resonated with readers, particularly women who felt they had passed their prime or missed their chance. It showed that opportunities could come at any age, that rejection could redirect you toward something better, and that building your own life gave you the foundation for real partnership. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried forward the values Katherine and Everett had modeled: independence within partnership, resilience in the face of setback, courage to start over, and the understanding that love based on respect and true seeing of another person was worth more than love based on youth or convenience. The ranch eventually passed out of family hands as later generations moved to cities and pursued different lives. But before it was sold, the family held one final gathering there, all the descendants of Katherine and Everett coming together to honor their memory and the legacy they had created. Standing in the house where their great-grandparents had lived and loved, raised children and weathered hardships, the family shared stories and memories. They walked through the rooms Katherine had made beautiful, stood on the porch where she and Everett had spent countless evenings, and visited the small cemetery plot where both were buried. The youngest generation asked questions. How did they meet? What was it like back then? Why is their story special? And the older generations answered, keeping the story alive. They met because she was rejected by someone else. He saw her worth when others saw only age. They built a life together based on respect and love, and they showed everyone that it is never too late to find happiness, never too late to start over, and that sometimes the worst rejection is really the best redirection. As the sun set on that final gathering at the ranch, casting golden light over the land Katherine and Everett had worked together, their descendants felt the presence of that enduring love. It was there in the careful construction of the house, in the well-planned layout of the ranch, in the legacy of skill and independence Katherine had passed down, in the reputation for fairness and hard work Everett had established. Their love story, which had begun with rejection in the dusty street of a small Texas town, had grown into something that touched generations. It proved that the best love stories were not always the easiest or the most conventional, but the ones built on foundation of self-knowledge, mutual respect, and the courage to choose hope over fear. In Shafter, Texas, where it all began. A historical marker was eventually placed noting the town's significance in the settling of West Texas. Among the notable residents mentioned were Everett and Katherine Jackson, whose partnership and contributions to the community represented the best of frontier spirit, resilience, independence, mutual support, and enduring love. Their story became more than just family history. It became a reminder that in any era, love finds a way when people are brave enough to see past surface expectations to the real person underneath. That rejection from the wrong person frees you to find the right person. That age is less important than character, and that the strongest partnerships are built between people who choose each other from strength, not desperation. Katherine Sullivan, who arrived in Shafter as a rejected mail-order bride, found far more than she had sought. She found meaningful work, true independence, genuine community, and deep love with a man who valued everything she was. Everett Jackson, who risked his heart again after devastating loss, found a partner who matched him in strength and complemented him in temperament, creating a life richer than anything he had imagined alone. Together, they proved that the best stories do not always start with love at first sight or youthful passion. Sometimes they start with rejection, rebuild through independence, and blossom into mature love that endures because it was chosen consciously and built deliberately. Their love story was not a fairy tale, but something better. A real story of real people who found real happiness through courage, work, and genuine connection. And that legacy, passed down through generations in stories and values, remained the truest memorial to two people who took a chance on each other and built something beautiful from what others had rejected. In the end, Katherine was not too old. She was exactly what Everett needed, and he was exactly what she needed. And together they created a love that outlasted their lives and inspired everyone who came after.